Rescue crews are now in the fourth day of searching for a 92-year-old hiker missing in Allegheny State Park. As News 4's Nelina Shapiro reports, rescuers hope a new description of where he was last seen will help their cause.
Hamilton got lost in the park on Wednesday while hiking with his 66-year-old daughter, Rebecca Huffman. When Hamilton was too weak to continue, his daughter walked to safety the next morning and called for help. On Sunday, she came back to the park and handed police this picture she drew of a mysterious concrete structure. Police say Hamilton was last seen about 100 feet from this structure, but here's the problem. Right now, officials can't find it.
Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode. This time, we invite you to join us as we discuss some of the absolute strangest missing person cases that we've ever encountered. These stories are beyond strange and mysterious. None have any rational or scientific explanation, yet, according to those that experienced them, they actually happened. So sit back, relax, and let us know what you think in the comments below. Do you have theories on any of these? If so, please share. We'd love to hear them. Missing 92-year-old and the mysterious structure nobody can identify. On November 10th, 2010, 66-year-old retired nurse Rebecca Huffman and her 92-year-old father, Reverend Thomas Hamilton, got lost while hiking in the Allegheny State Park. They walked for miles through dark woods, climbed up hills on their hands and knees, and were freezing cold. The very next day, Rebecca walked to safety and called for help. She stated that her father was too weak to continue, so she told him to stay put and not move. Search and rescue was immediately deployed to the area, and there was no sign of her father, Thomas. The next day, Rebecca came back to the park and handed police a picture she drew of a mysterious concrete structure about 6 feet in width and about 15 to 20 feet wide. It was a 3-foot-high structure that you can walk into and be standing on a rock-like floor. Thomas was last seen about 100 feet from the structure. But there was a huge problem. Officials were never able to find this mysterious structure that his daughter Rebecca described. A massive 8-day search conducted by hundreds of volunteers, police officers, firefighters, and K-9 units over 5,000 acres of the park turned up nothing. Strangely enough, 2 years later, his remains were found 500 feet from where the search and rescue crews started their official search. The mysterious structure has never been located. Linda Artega and the people hiding in the bushes. On September 22, 2012, Linda Artega and her brother Eddie Huff set out for a day's hiking in the Arkansas Ozarks. The area in which they were hiking was an area that they both frequented. However, during their hike, Eddie suddenly found himself in an unfamiliar area. Eddie looked up through the trees, hoping to find some degree of positioning from the mountains around them, and when he looked beside him, Linda had simply vanished. When Eddie eventually returned home, he seemingly had no memory of what had happened in the park. A search party was sent into the forest to find Linda, but with winter temperatures beginning to set in and having left with barely any supplies at all, hope was fading fast. Linda would reemerge from the forest almost a week later. She appeared shocked and unnerved by whatever incident had unfolded and led her here. She would later claim, although the details were murky at best, that she came across people, but when she asked for help, they'd act like they didn't hear her. Linda says she remembered them looking right at her and not saying a thing. These people were hiding in the bushes, she says. They were following me but would not help me. In addition, Linda stated that dark figures appeared in the forest at dusk. They were like silhouettes that moved through the trees, but no matter how much she screamed, they couldn't hear her. She said they constantly watched her, but never acknowledged her calls for help. Linda said that she was just glad that the forest had finally released her. Casey Hathaway and the Bear. 3-year-old Casey Hathaway disappeared from his great-grandmother's backyard on January 25, 2019. Casey was playing with 2 other relatives in his great-grandmother's backyard the day he went missing. When he didn't come inside when the others did, his family started searching for him. After 45 minutes passed, his grandmother called 911.
Okay, and what's going on there?
We lost my 2-year-old grandson that's walked in the woods back there and we can't find him. 3-year-old grandson.
Okay, so who's there with them?
His little sister.
Are you saying his 3-year-old?
Yeah, he's 3.
Okay.
The girls come to the house and left him there and he's walked off somewhere and we can't find him.
Okay, but you're not there at the house now?
I'm at the house, yeah.
Okay, and how long ago do you know he walked in there?
It's been at least 45 minutes, because we've been looking all in the woods for him.
And it's behind your house?
Huh?
Is it directly behind your house?
Yeah. Well, on the side, yeah.
Is he a white, black?
He's white.
Do you know what he was wearing?
Probably a black little coat.
A black coat?
Yeah.
Okay. Does he usually do this?
Huh?
Does he usually do this?
No.
Was he wearing his pants?
Yeah, he had pants.
Was it jeans?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. And you said about 45 minutes to go?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Is it a big area of woods behind your house?
Yeah, it's pretty big.
I think you've been out there looking for him?
Yes.
What is it?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, we got a deputy headed to you, okay? And you said 45 minutes directly behind your house or side?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, if you see him, let us know. We have some deputies headed that way, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
He was walking in the woods back there and we can't find him, his great-grandmother told the 911 dispatcher. The other ones came through the house but left him there and he walked off somewhere and we can't find him. Search and rescue teams from across the state immediately came together to brave the treacherous terrain and low temperatures, hoping to find Kasich. 3 days later, rescuers were still combing the woods when they heard the missing 3-year-old boy call out for his mother. In the emergency room, Kasich started talking about what happened in the woods. He said he had a friend that was a bear. The bear took care of him and kept him warm while he was lost in the woods. Kasich goes on to say that the bear also fed him berries. Now, the local sheriff stated that there are bears in the woods of Craven County, North Carolina, but there's no evidence to prove one was with Kasich. He goes on to say, all that matters is that something was there to comfort Kasich during the 3 days he was missing. Stephen Kubacki, missing for over a year. One February morning in 1978 near Lake Michigan, student Stephen Kubacki would venture out to indulge in several hours of skiing. However, when he still hadn't returned the following day, a huge search was put in motion. Strangely and ominously, footprints were discovered in a location where the student claimed to be heading. And what's more, they stopped right at the frozen water's edge. There was no sign of any markings on the frozen surface of the water, and no signs that the ice had been broken anywhere. Later that day, Stephen's skis and backpack were discovered. However, no other sign of Stephen came to light, and the searches were eventually called off. His family, while not giving up hope, were prepared for the worst. Then, over a year later, in early May 1979, Stephen would appear out of the blue on his parents' doorstep. He had very little memory of where he had been. He had awoken earlier that day in a field in Pittsfield, hundreds of miles from where he disappeared, and around 40 miles from the family home. Even stranger, he was wearing clothes that weren't his and had a strange bag of maps with him that he didn't recognize. Rather than compensate himself financially with the many offers from media people for his story, he instead retreated from the public, refusing to speak of the incident, of which he claimed he had no memory, and not wishing to undergo such things as hypnotic regression, as he wasn't experiencing any psychological problems and wished to keep it that way. Ambrose Smith, gone for 24 hours. Ambrose Smith normally played happily at home in Newaygo County, Michigan. But on October the 8th, 2013, Ambrose was sitting in the lounge with her father when he briefly left the room, and upon his return, she was nowhere to be found. A massive search involving hundreds of volunteers was immediately activated, covering the entire surrounding area. It wasn't until the next day that Ambrose was found a few miles from her home. Strangely, she was discovered in a location that had been extensively searched the previous day. How the little girl had managed to traverse such a huge distance and evade the search teams who sprang into action so soon after her disappearance remains a complete mystery. Zen Rang vanished while piloting an aircraft. On March 15, 2016, Zen Rang flew out of Ann Arbor in a 1984 Cessna 172P owned by the Michigan Flyers. When it was overdue to return, authorities were notified and the wreckage was found in a forested area near Manitowocq, Ontario, northeast of Munising, over Lake Superior. The downed Cessna he had been flying was found in a densely wooded area in Ontario the same day he rented the aircraft from a flying group at the Ann Arbor airport. But Zen was not at the scene of the crash, and there were no footprints in the snow to indicate that Zen was in the aircraft at the time it crash-landed. All the evidence indicates the aircraft was operating normally and crashed because it ran out of fuel. Authorities have theorized that at some point prior to the crash, Zen must have exited the aircraft while it was in the air. Searches around the crash site and along the route that the aircraft was known to have traveled were searched, and yet nothing was found. Another search was conducted in the Petoskey area where Zen's cell phone last pinged, but again, nothing was found. Zen Rang was an experienced pilot who was also a PhD candidate at the University of Michigan. As of this recording in June 2020, his whereabouts are still unknown, and his case remains a mystery. Hello, friends. In this video, we're going to discuss the strange disappearances of some of the people you'd most likely unexpect to go missing. Park rangers. Now, we're using parks as a broad term in the scope of this video, as it could include lands protected culturally or historically, including national parks, state parks, and other designated wildlife, wilderness, and recreational areas. Different countries use different names for this position. Warden is the favorite term in Canada, Ireland, and the United Kingdom. Within the United States, the National Park Service refers to the position as a park ranger. The U.S. Forest Service refers to the position as a forest ranger. Other countries use the term park warden or even game warden to describe this occupation. Now, the profession includes a number of disciplines and specializations, and park rangers are often required to be proficient in more than one of the following: law enforcement, emergency response, firefighting, dispatch, scientist and scholar, maintenance, and administration. These individuals, particularly those in administration, are often heavily cross-trained in several of the aforementioned areas in order to allow for a knowledge of all other areas and duties under their authority. As a result, when people become lost or go missing in a park, the park rangers are usually the first ones on the scene to document the case and to start search and rescue efforts into motion. More than anyone, park rangers are very familiar with the missing person phenomenon, which happens in parks around the world, and were actually among the first to write about it. But what happens when one of these rangers themselves go missing? I invite you to join me now as we explore 5 strange cases of missing park rangers. With that said, let's begin. Number 1, Ranger Ralph W. Heath. Ralph W. Heath was a park ranger at Baxter State Park in Maine, United States, who allegedly died of exposure while attempting to rescue a woman who was lost on Mount Katahdin in 1963. On Monday, October 28th of that year, 2 women, Helen Mower and Margaret Ibisick, both from Concord, Massachusetts, took the Cathedral Trail and climbed Baxter Peak on the mountain. They reached the summit and stopped to have lunch at around 1:30 in the afternoon. When the 2 friends decided to start their hike again and head back down, they had a small argument over the route Margaret wanted to take. Helen simply wanted to go back the way they came, but Margaret wanted to bushwhack, which, very simply put, means to leave the established trail or get off the beaten path, as it were. Helen knew how risky this was, although Margaret had more hiking experience than she did, not by much, and only 3 years total. She thought it way too dangerous and stormed off to take Dudley Trail, which was the original trail they had taken to get there in the first place, and let her friend make her own mistakes and go her own way. It was a decision she would later regret very much. Margaret, on the other hand, thought she was taking a shortcut and laughed off her friend's warnings, and they went their separate ways, agreeing to meet at the Chimney Pond lean-to. When Helen reached the final destination and saw there was no sign of Margaret, she decided to wait, but got very worried very quickly. Though it was a nice and sunny day out that day, a nor'easter was blowing in, and the weather was about to very quickly take a turn for the worse. She started calling for Margaret at the headwell, near and towards the mountain itself. She was pleasantly surprised when she heard her friend respond and started calling back, despite the fact she was asking for help. Margaret yelled that she was not hurt, but was stuck in the treacherous terrain and wouldn't possibly be able to continue her turn back, and pleaded with Helen to go and get some help. This is when Helen made her way to the ranger station and encountered Ranger Ralph Heath having dinner. She explained the situation, and Ralph immediately knew how dangerous that path was and how serious a problem they had. He was, however, thanking his lucky stars, in his mind at least, that there hadn't been any snowfall, at least not yet. As any other year, for as far back as he could remember, there would have been snow covering the mountain for weeks at that point in the year. Ralph followed Helen back to Chimney Point and yelled out in the direction of Margaret and instructed her in a very calm and clear voice to stay where she was and not try to move or go anywhere. Help was on the way. With the wind increasing like it was, Ralph knew that the situation could go from scary to deadly in a matter of just seconds. He had to act fast. He took Helen back to the ranger station and radioed his supervisor, Heath Taylor, and told him there was a hiker stranded in the upper basin on the mountain. Now, a little background on Mr. Ralph Heath to show what a brave man he was indeed, and how he was definitely not someone to shy away from trouble. He served in World War II and was honorably discharged. However, a house fire destroyed everything he owned but the clothes on his back, including his discharge papers. He was redrafted to serve in the Korean War before anyone could verify he had already been discharged and had finished his service to the country. Ralph, however, went without hesitation to serve, only for his wife to decide she didn't want to deal with another tour, especially one he shouldn't have had to have gone on, and file for divorce. So, this was a man who was seeking solitude and peace in his life after all of this tragedy and heartbreak, and he absolutely loved his job as a ranger and the beauty of the mountains. Despite the weather outside becoming more and more perilous and the orders from the supervising ranger that they had to wait until morning to attempt any kind of search and rescue, Ralph decided the risk to Margaret was too great, leaving her out there all alone at night. Snow was definitely coming, and a lot of it. He decided to attempt to rescue himself, despite it being nightfall and dark outside. The temperature had drastically dropped as well. He borrowed Helen's backpack and filled it with essentials such as food, a sleeping bag, water, a parka, and extra clothes. He also took 80 feet of rope, and at 11 p.m. that same night, headed alone down Dudley Trail. It wasn't until 5 hours later, at 4 in the morning, that he reported back to Helen. He told her he had spoken to Margaret about an hour after heading out and was able to obtain her location, when he again told her to stay put and assured her help was on the way. She reiterated she was uninjured, but very cold. She's probably more than a little scared as well, I'm sure. He told Helen that Margaret was near the waterfall, and he wouldn't be able to reach her without more rope and more people. This was an area that even ice climbers considered treacherous and dangerous. Ralph was also extremely concerned because Margaret was refusing to stay and wait for help to arrive, and was determined to find a way out herself for fear she would freeze to death before anyone would be able to rescue her. After reassuring Helen and telling her what was going on, he contacted his supervisor, Heath Taylor, and made him aware as well. Taylor dispatched the Maine Forest Service, 2 additional park rangers, and a Maine game warden. By 6 in the morning, Tuesday the 29th, an icy rain began to fall and the wind had picked up drastically. Ralph Heath ate his breakfast and then informed Helen Maurer of his plans. He was going to ascend the ravine from Chimney Pond, climb straight up the head wall and into the waterfall, where he would provide comfort to Barbara And if he couldn't manage to rescue her himself, at least she wouldn't be scared and alone, and he would wait with her until the additional resources arrived to get them both out. Now, he was clearly putting himself at great risk, knowing it was unlikely he would be able to do anything but just sit with Margaret and wait. Yet, he did it anyway. He was truly a hero. While the plan was very reasonable, and despite being a chain smoker, Ralph was in great shape and a capable hiker and climber. However, he had hiked Dudley Trail 4 times in the last 24 hours, and it was a very strenuous and hard trail to get through. He was absolutely exhausted at this point, and shouldn't have been doing any more hiking or climbing without getting some much-needed rest. This would, after all, be a trailless climb he was planning to make. He wasn't going to leave Margaret, however, so the admonishments and warnings from his co-workers and even Helen fell on deaf ears. Ralph reached Barbara just as Hurricane Jenny reached the mountain. He sat with her for a little while, and the two hunkered down. A ranger sergeant set out on foot towards Chimney Pond as well and stated that, by the time he got to just the basin, the conditions were whiteout with gale-force winds. By noon, not even the jeeps could make it to the trailhead. There was 18 inches of snow already and more falling fast. He even reported that, only halfway up the mountain, his clothes had frozen solid and literally cracked at the elbows. Having no visibility and facing merciless winds, not to mention the condition of his clothing, forced him back down the mountain. He stated he knew that both Ralph and Margaret were in some very serious trouble, as help could no longer get to them. It would be impossible for them to help themselves as well. The following morning, Wednesday, October 30th, 1963, Warden Supervisor David Priest returned to Roaring Brook and set up what we today call an Incident Command Center and had at least 35 people there working at all times. All different avenues of help were brought in and explored, but nobody could do anything as the snow was still accumulating and fast on Friday morning. Flash forward to November 1st. Now it had been 5 full days since Margaret had gotten herself stuck and 4 whole days since Ralph Heath had joined her to provide comfort and possible rescue, which we know now he was unable to do. On Saturday, November 2nd, all teams and persons involved decided that any rescue attempts were futile, that they were simply wasting resources at that point. Mr. William Lowell Putnam III was one of the most experienced mountaineers in the country at the time and had been helping with the rescue effort since Friday. Finally, on Sunday, November 3rd, he made the statement that he believed Ralph and Margaret had most likely died on Tuesday, and reiterated the waste of resources should they continue on this impossible trek to try and save them. It wasn't until almost 6 months later, in April of 1964, that Margaret Ivesick's body was found and finally able to be brought down the mountain and sent home. Even at this time, though, they needed chemical salts to melt the ice so as not to damage the corpse in any way, and the rescue still took an additional 3 days. It was found during the autopsy that Margaret was severely injured and hadn't survived more than a few hours due to the extreme blood loss. Her official cause of death was exsanguination. In other words, she bled out. 2 weeks later, on May 15th, they finally found Ralph's body. He was found, oddly enough, 400 feet above where Margaret was found. They airlifted him out of there, and his autopsy showed nothing at all. The coroner stated, "It looks as if he simply sat down and went to sleep," which is not uncommon when people freeze to death. Now, folks, though this was a bit of a long one, I think it's important we go over a few of the facts here. First, if Margaret had died very quickly after getting stuck where she was, how was she yelling to Ralph hours later? She had severed an artery in her leg and would have bled out within just minutes. Still, she was calling out and answering him hours after she initially got stuck. How is this even possible? She'd called out to Helen as well, even before that, and we know neither one was under any kind of duress or sick at all, so they couldn't have been hallucinating. There were no other bodies found in the area that time, and no one else had come forward claiming to have been the person stuck up there and answering or calling for help that could have been mistaken for Margaret. This is very strange, but becoming more and more common. Either search and rescue workers will hear the calls of people who are missing only to never be able to find the location of where the calls are coming from, or the person who is stuck or lost will hear search and rescue but never seem to be able to find them either. The weather coming on so suddenly and so strong all at once is another very familiar factor when talking about the missing in the woods and the mountains. In fact, they were weeks late for any snow at all, and the weather started out that day as sunny and warm. This is just one of the many parameters we now look at while investigating the strange deaths and disappearances in the national parks. How and why did it all come on so suddenly, almost remarkably so? I guess we'll never know, but that doesn't stop us from investigating and pondering and searching for answers and the truth, though, does it? Number 2, Ranger Randy Morgansson. In July of 1996, Ranger Randy Morgansson was working as a backcountry ranger at Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks. He was the most ranger in the High Sierras, having been a backwoods ranger for 28 years at that time. On this particular day, July 21st, 1996, Randy loaded his pack and went on his routine and regular patrol of his station. He was 64 years old and in almost perfect health. Some of his co-workers even thought he was invincible and impervious to the perils that came with the job. It was just about daybreak when he headed out to patrol near Bench Lake, taking nothing with him but an old ski pole to use as a hiking stick. He was never seen or heard from again. Now, as is often the case in these strange disappearances, a sudden rain started to fall, blew up out of nowhere. Got rid of any footprints or other evidence as to where Ranger Randy could have possibly gone or what could have happened to him. Over the following days, there was plenty of frustration as dogs followed scents that seemed to abruptly stop, and random pieces of gear were found in several different locations, but none could be positively linked to Randy. A FLIR helicopter equipped with an infrared camera picked up a campfire burning on a hillside, but with no one in sight tending it. Eventually, the search was called off, with no sign of Randy or a body. Then, a letter arrived at Randy and Judy Morgansson's home in Sedona, Arizona, from Randy. Judy opened the letter and noted it had been postmarked 2 days after his apparent disappearance. Since there is no postal service in the national park, Judy didn't understand just how Randy could have mailed the letter. That added to the suspicions that he had simply left the area to start a new life away from the National Park Service. 13 days after Randy had been reported missing, in early August 1996, the official search, which included helicopters, dog teams, and dozens upon dozens of volunteers, was called off. Not a single trace of Randy had been found, not even a footprint. Finally, in July 2001, 5 years after the search was called off for Randy, a 19-year-old member of a California Conservation Corps trail building crew ventured off trail and found some remains. The worker found some new evidence near a creek and a gorge in the Widow Peak drainage, very near the outermost borders of the search area, below the pools of a waterfall. Rangers were called in to search and soon discovered a tattered shirt with Morgansson's badge attached. Then a backpack with a buckle fastened, and a boot. On close examination of the single boot, which was half submerged in water, it had something white protruding from it. A leg bone. The boot and pack seemed to match the description of gear that Randy reportedly had been using that day. Teams for both investigation and recovery were flown in, and shortly after, a functioning park-issue radio was discovered resting on top of the falls, not at the bottom like the other evidence. It was turned to the on position. This discovery confused matters even more. Although these remains seemed to confirm Randy had been in the mountains the whole time, investigators weren't certain whether this is where Randy had died. Rangers had remembered already searching this gorge and crossing at the exact spot where the radio was found. Retired Sierra Subdistrict Ranger Alden Nash believes Morgansson had fallen through a snow bridge and broken his leg, and his body had simply been hidden beneath ice throughout the search. Weirdly, during the rescue attempt in 1996, Randy's wife Judy had dreamed of a dead man floating in a lake. I don't think it was an accident, says Eric Blem, author of The Last Season, a book about the disappearance of Randy Morgansson, which is well worth a read, by the way. Blem says Randy may have wanted to appear to have died on the job just to make sure Judy, who was still his wife at the time, got the benefit from the government, a policy not honored in the case of taking one's own life. If he wanted to throw off the dogs or sucker people into believing something happened, he did a great job, Blem says, After so many years, with the bones gnawed, there's no way to say exactly what happened. The National Park Service named a peak in memory of Randy. The unofficial Mount Morgansson, so named in his memory, is the first peak west of Mount Russell, a half a mile away, and just north of Mount Whitney. Mount Morgansson should be distinguished from the west peak of Mount Russell, the higher of the Russell's twin summits, which are only separated by a tenth of a mile. A summit registered with the name Mount Randy Morgansson, 13,920 feet, was taken to the top by two park veterans in 2007. A peak bagger named Richard Petrowski found the original register missing when he climbed Mount Morgansson on June 20, 2008. He placed a temporary one that day and made a huge effort to return to the summit 1 week later with a weatherproof ammo can and a replacement journal. Barely a handful of people, if any, signed it each year. Number 3, Ranger Brendan Unit. Larimer County, Colorado Department of Natural Resources Ranger Brendan Unit, 27 years old, went missing while out searching at night for a missing boater. While there had been nothing reported about the results of the initial missing person who Brendan was looking for, it seems a sudden high wind event caused him to capsize in his boat and die of what was officially said to be freshwater drowning. Now, folks, I'm no expert, but what I do know about is the strange weather events and causes of death that just don't fit the season or the profession the person in question was in. And I'm not the only one either. Many people are wondering how a professional outdoorsman could capsize and drown. And what about this so-called strange high wind event? Why does there always seem to be a sudden change in the weather during one of these missing persons encounters? These are the things many of us in this community wonder about after seeing case after case after case. The same thing over and over again, but never with any definitive or even sensible answers. Number 4, Ranger Jeff Christensen. In July of 2005, another seasonal park ranger died under mysterious circumstances in the same county Brendan Unit passed away in as well. Jeff Christensen was conducting a routine backcountry patrol of the Lake Lawn Trailhead when he allegedly lost his footing and fell from Mummy's Range in Rocky Mountain National Park in Larimer County, Colorado. The search for the initially missing ranger lasted a little over a week, and he was found on August 6, 2005 by a hiker. The official cause of death was a left temporal skull fracture that led to a subdural hematoma. The ranger has been said to have lost his footing and died of a tragic accidental fall. He'd only been on the job for 4 years and was survived by his parents. Now, is it possible for someone with at least 4 years' experience to die of something so simple? Could it be that there's something out there in our national parks and forests hunting these rangers? Perhaps they or it wants to take out the people who are going to be able to help and possibly even save the other people this mysterious predator or predators are trying to take out. We must keep searching for the truth. We owe it to all the people who die of something that is seemingly simple and accidental, but could very well be something much more sinister. Number 5, Ranger Paul Fugate. Here is yet another tragic account of a park ranger who vanished mysteriously while doing his job, never to be seen or heard from again. Now, Paul was known as a rebel and even anti-establishment to a point. He stayed for weeks at a time in a small cobblestone cabin on site at the monument. He was a naturalist who did small tasks such as answering the visitors' questions and putting together trail guides. Originally, Paul worked at the Navajo Monument in Arizona, but was transferred soon after being disciplined by one of his bosses about his laziness and slovenly appearance. Apparently, this supervisor admitted in a later report that he was annoyed he couldn't technically fire Paul and also that he hated the hippies coming in to work for the monument. Paul was charged with stealing government equipment when he took some hay home for his wife's horse. He was in an open relationship with his wife and sleeping with multiple women who were co-workers. While all of this may seem irrelevant, we must look at every aspect we can of a person's life when they go missing under such strange circumstances, especially when people in their profession are seemingly doing so at an alarming rate, and have been for a while. Before he left his post that fateful day, he left instructions with the only other staff member there that if he wasn't back by a certain time, for them to close up without him. He then walked out and down towards the area of land the park was about to acquire, one which was shrouded in problems as there had been much conflict about the 400-acre purchase with the local Apache tribe. Again, he was never seen or heard from, and no body has ever been found.
I've been separated from my group. It's been a couple of hours now, I think. I'm not sure. I was trying to find my way out, and I can't. But I'm going to stay here. I don't think that I went too far. I'm not sure that I don't know the name of the cave. Our last entry point was somewhere near Tulum, Guantanamo, Mexico. If someone can notify the police or the authorities, or someone can help, I'm going to stay here. I have water and some food. I'm going to stay here.
Hello, friends. Steve Stockton here with you. Now, for some, a walk in the wilderness can be the perfect getaway from everyday life and a chance to reconnect with Mother Nature. For others, the great outdoors can be a dangerous place, and unfortunately, is a place where many people meet their end or just mysteriously vanish. Here are cases for you to consider. Randy Rasco. On November 19, 2015, park rangers at the Mammoth Cave National Park in Kentucky noticed that a car had been sitting in the car park for around 2 weeks. This immediately set off warning bells, and after doing some digging for information, they discovered that the car belonged to 40-year-old Randy Rasco. As the car had been there for quite some time, the park rangers set about searching for Randy right away. But when he couldn't be found in or near the parking area, they opened an investigation and widened their search. Park rangers and investigators contacted Randy's family to see if they had spoken to him, but chillingly, they had been out of contact for a few months. According to his sister Sherry, up until May 2015, everything was normal. On a regular basis, he was doing his normal things, hunting, fishing, and kept in contact with her brother who lived close to his Bowling Green apartment. Then one day out of the blue, he packed up his belongings, quit his job, and had his mail forwarded to another address, and just left. Sherry said they filed a missing persons report after they found out he had just fled, and were worried as he had recently gotten divorced. For a month, the Rasco family waited for any news, and in June, he was found safe and sound in Washington State. Randy made it clear that he didn't want to speak to his family at that time and wanted to be alone. As painful as it was, his family respected his boundaries and assured him they would welcome him back with open arms whenever he was ready. For the next few months, it's believed that Randy traveled all around the U.S., all while maintaining his privacy and secrecy. His family didn't know that anything was wrong until the Mammoth Cave National Park Rangers contacted them to let them know that his car had been found abandoned. With this second disappearance, his family hoped that there would be a positive resolution. But sadly, Randy Rasco is still missing. Search crews, volunteers, and even the Civil Air Patrol all joined in on the search for Randy, scouring the over 53,000 acres of land in the park. Despite their best efforts and multiple searches, no sign of Randy has ever been found, and his car is the only clue we have in terms of his mysterious disappearance. Randy Rasco is described as a white male, 6 foot 2 inches tall, with black hair, hazel eyes, and a slim, athletic build. Anyone with any information is asked to please contact the Mammoth Cave National Park at 270-758-2180. Catherine Van Alst. 8-year-old Catherine Van Alst disappeared from Devil's Den State Park near Arkansas's Ozark National Forest when she and her family were camping. Catherine apparently was playing with her brothers when she wandered off and got lost. What makes Catherine's disappearance remarkable is she was found 6 days later. When found, she was wandering the woods and was eerily calm. University of Arkansas student Porter Chadwick was part of the search party that found Catherine. He told the Pittsburgh Press that when he found her, she walked stoically out of a cave and just said, "Here I am." Many other hikers have gotten lost in that part of the Ozarks and haven't been as lucky as Catherine. A grown woman was lost there for 17 days and died just 50 yards from the road. How did Catherine survive in the woods for 6 days? Did someone take her only to return her 6 days later? Or is there an explanation of this story that we simply can't comprehend? Either way, someone or something might just be lurking in Devil's Den. Kenny Veach. 47-year-old Kenny Veach mysteriously disappeared in the Mojave Desert in Nevada on November 14, 2014. Kenny was hiking near Area 51 and was looking for cave systems and mine shafts. Kenny has uploaded several videos to his YouTube channel under the username SnakeBitMcGee, where he describes entering a cave with an M-shaped opening. He wrote in one comment, "That ain't nothing. I'm a long-distance hiker. One time during one of my hikes out by Nellis Air Force Base, I found a hidden cave. The entrance to the cave was shaped like a perfect capital M. I always enter every cave I find, but as I began to enter this particular cave, my whole body began to vibrate. Suddenly, I became very scared and hightailed it out of there. That was one of the strangest things that ever happened to me." Now, these videos gained popularity following his mysterious disappearance, and in these videos, he does indeed talk about how his whole body vibrated and he felt scared upon entering this mysterious M cave. Armed with a gun and a camera this time, Kenny headed back out to the M cave on November 10th, 2014, hoping to get a better look inside. However, Kenny never returned home. Although he was a very experienced hiker and outdoorsman, Kenny rarely took a map or GPS device with him on his hikes. According to his family, on the day of his disappearance, he told them that he would only be gone for a short overnight trip, but then when he didn't return home, they immediately called the police. Police, volunteers, and search and rescue teams all scoured the area where Kenny was last known to have been, and on November 22nd, 2014, volunteers found Kenny's phone. According to those volunteers, the trail went cold soon after they located his phone, and there have been no signs of Kenny ever since. At the time of this episode, the mysterious disappearance of Kenny Veach is very much alive in true crime and paranormal circles, but it appears that we are still no closer to uncovering the truth. Devil's Hole and the tragic disappearance of two teens in 1965. Now, there's just something about a place with the name Devil and its title that piques the curiosity of some people. There are countless locations all over the world which have this particular word in their name. Not only devil either, there are many other words that symbolize or mean devil or evil or some other form of something not very good or beautiful, given, somewhat ironically, to some of the world's most breathtaking and wondrous places. Sometimes the location will have gotten its name innocently enough, such as because the geology of the place simply looks foreboding and sinister, especially under the cover of night. Much of the time, these particular places are said to be cursed, enchanted, or downright evil, and the spooky and scary landscape only lends credence to these rumors and legends. So much of the time, though, these places with this particular word in the title are associated with not just devils, demons, spirits, and other otherworldly phenomena, but with real tragedies, disappearances, deaths, maybe bizarre sounds and strange lights in the sky. Today, though, we're going to focus on one place in particular, where a mysterious tragedy struck. Devil's Hole, which is located in the aptly named Death Valley National Park in California, United States. This portion of the Mojave Desert, contained in Death Valley National Park, is the driest and hottest place in the United States. Near Badwater, in the long trench of the desert between the Panamint Range on the west and the Black Mountains on the east, is the lowest dry land in the Western Hemisphere, an amazing 282 feet below sea level. A veritable showcase of desert extremes, Death Valley National Park includes one of the largest salt pans on Earth, dramatically faulted landscapes, young volcanic craters, and massive dune fields. Today, we're going all the way back to the year 1965. Death Valley was very different from the Los Angeles of the time, where there were uprisings happening all over the place and all of it being shown live on the evening news. Death Valley, California, was in one of the least populated parts of the state at the time, and a whole different world from the more largely inhabited cities which surrounded it. On June 20th, 1965, 4 high school buddies set out to a remote desert location about 90 miles northwest of Las Vegas. Their intent was to joy dive into a deep geothermal abyss called Devil's Hole. Sadly, 2 of the young men would never re-emerge from this mysterious fossil water portal. Arriving at their destination, the foursome hiked up a hot, barren hillside, which overlooked a large-scale ranching operation that would nearly erase a much smaller and nearly ancient complex called Ash Meadows within a few short years. A well-trampled trail led to the entrance of a limestone chasm that had allegedly opened a whopping 60,000 years ago, after possibly some seismic event caused the roof of the cave to collapse in on itself. The foursome of boys, which was made up of Paul Gianconteri, a 19-year-old cafeteria worker at the nearby Nevada test site, his new brother-in-law, 20-year-old David Rose, who was a Las Vegas casino parking attendant, were with their other friend, 19-year-old Bill Alter, and his younger brother Jack. Boys scrambled under a fenced enclosure posted with warning signs, and thinking they were immune to any trouble these warning signs might be posted about, they proceeded to descend the 30 or so feet down to a ledge, where the faint but flitting movement of tiny blue-gray pupfish could be observed swimming in the 8 by 60-foot pool. That is, if any of the 4 young men had bothered to look just a bit closer at what they were about to jump into. After suiting up with scuba tanks, masks, and dive lights, Paul, David, and Bill dove into the claustrophobic waters. The temperature was nearly indistinguishable from that of their skin. Upon entering the pool, the boys most likely disturbed the delicate algae spawning mats where the entire population of the exceedingly rare Cyprinodon diabolus continues to prosper and breed exclusively. Jack was the only one who hadn't jumped in, as he was delegated the one who would remain stationed on the ledge in case anything went wrong. Sometime after midnight, Paul failed to resurface, so David and Bill quickly redove into the waters in a vain attempt to locate their missing friend. Bill Alter frantically followed David Rose down to approximately 170 feet until David, too, disappeared into the darkness. The bodies of the brothers-in-law were never recovered. Many people believed back then, and still do believe, that these young men were inspired to go diving at night despite the dangers in this specific place because of a newspaper article from the year before, which detailed a speleological research expedition of a massive underground lake below Death Valley, led by California-based professional diver Jim Houtz, who would ironically dive numerous times around the clock with military personnel and other volunteer divers in their attempt to locate the missing men for 36 whole hours until the search was eventually called off. The only traces left of the 2 brother-in-laws? A mask and a snorkel. There was also a flashlight tied to a ledge some 100 feet below. It seemed to signal, ineffectively, the way out of the otherworldly underwater cave system. Articles detailing the unsuccessful rescue effort were published nationwide. In the Sarasota Journal, dated June 22, 1965, Alst stated that he had previously dived in Devil's Hole around 300 times over 28 trips, further commenting, "It's beautiful in there. It goes straight down 160 feet, like a pipe, then opens into a room that is about 300 feet long and maybe 40 feet wide. The bottom of the room is about 260 feet down. Then it narrows into another tube. I dived to 315 feet. Maybe that's a record, I don't know. But at the end of the tube, it opens again into something else. We don't know what the next room is, or if it's a room at all. It's like infinity." There are some very terrifying legends from the native tribes of the area about this particular place called Devil's Hole. The Timbasha told tales of water babies who would surface and swallow a swimmer or diver whole should they stay in the pool for too long. Other legends suggested that So-Apitsi, a legendary malevolent giant who dwelled at mountain springs and caves, would snatch and devour unwary victims. notwithstanding, Barbara Durham, an elder of the Timbisha Shoshone who shared these stories at a 2002 workshop, admitted that she and her friends enjoyed how the pupfish tickled their toes when they played in the spring. Keep in mind here that the Devil's Hole pupfish, as they are specifically named, are considered by experts to be the rarest fish found anywhere on the planet. They were even the first ever species to be classified as endangered. The fish are not important to the story at all, really, but it seemed worth mentioning in order to reinforce how very special and perhaps a bit magical this place actually is. As far as the two young men who disappeared without a trace back in this mystical and extremely dangerous underwater cave system decades ago, well, they've never been found, and neither have any clues relating to what could have possibly happened to them. As for one more bit of interesting fact that could lend a bit of credence to something a bit more sinister being afoot, as the local tribes absolutely believe, at this otherwise serene and tranquil-looking water source, it's said that Charles Manson himself spent several days at Devil's Hole, trying to figure out a way to make it safely down into the chasm, with some saying he was convinced he would never have to come back up. Allegedly, he had an obsession with the place, and was convinced that there was an underwater portal to an alternate dimension, or more specifically, a portal to the underworld, where he felt he and his family would be able to safely wait out the coming apocalypse he so famously predicted would happen that never actually did. Charles Manson's problem lay in figuring out a way to drain the hole, and it seemed like he may have been given this idea by an alleged Indian legend that resurfaced during the 1920s, contending that a subterranean sect of leather-clad humanoids lived down within an eerily yellow-green lit abode somewhere in the Mojave Desert. Could this possibly be true? Just as with the case of these poor young men, just doing what young men do and looking for a night of perhaps irresponsible but never thought to be deadly fun, we may never actually know. So if you do visit Death Valley in the Mojave Desert just outside Las Vegas, don't venture in to Devil's Hole.
He flat out told us, "Mom, she's dead, she needs our help." And that's when I got the goosebumps and I was like, oh my gosh. He was just in our car and he was pointing out to a certain spot in the meadow.
While Victoria Gorba and her family stopped for lunch, her son Caden began talking to someone.
And my husband and I kind of looked at each other like, what? And he goes, yeah, there's a lady over in the meadow in a black shirt. And I got goosebumps. He says, she needs our help, but she's dead. And she's laying face down with her legs up. And she can't talk to me, but she's over there. We need to go help her.
Jake and Victoria checked out the meadow, but saw nothing.
He kept saying, trust me, Mom. And I was like, I trust you, bud. You know, I believe you 100%.
Spooked, the couple decided to end the trip early and head home.
And we put it on Facebook, seeing if anybody knew anything about the area. And come to find out that there was a lady missing with the description that he described to us within a 5-mile radius of where we were.
Sandra Hughes had gone missing in July of 2020. Caden had described her in detail and recognized her in 3 of 4 photos.
He was very adamant that we needed to help her. And he described down to blue hair. He said she has a black shirt, blue jeans, and blue hair, Mom.
And the sheriff said
that's the exact description of her when she went missing.
Hello, friends. We recently learned of what may be one of the strangest updates to a missing person case that we've ever brought forth. Now, sometimes in these missing person cases that we cover, there will be a little bit of a paranormal or supernatural element. It's usually something small and not very significant to the overall case. But sometimes it seems that the unknown can play a larger part in these cases. Stories of UFOs, the Fae, Bigfoot or other cryptids, portals, translucent entities, etc. But is it possible that the ghost of a missing woman may be trying to help solve her disappearance, or at least help locate her remains? We ask that you keep an open mind and consider the following case. Back in episode number 7 of our 10 Unsolved National Park Disappearances series, we brought you the story of Sandra Hughes. To recap, 54-year-old Sandra Johnson Hughes of California was last heard from on June 26, 2020. Sandra had embarked on a solo camping trip in the Sierra south of Yosemite to escape from the current pandemic. Sandra had recently moved from Maui, Hawaii to California in June of 2020. She had trained to be a park ranger in college and was experienced in the outdoors. On July 5th of that year, the Madera County Sheriff's Office asked for the public's help in locating Sandra after they found her campsite near the Johnson's Meadow section of the forest in disarray. On that same day, the authorities located Hughes' silver Saab in Chiquito Creek to the north of the campsite. They said it appeared to have crashed into a tree at a speed of less than 20 miles per hour before rolling into the ravine. Hikers reported seeing Sandra on July 4th, 2020, and said she was barefoot and had a bruise on her face. They offered to help her, but she declined medical assistance. Officers and volunteer search and rescue teams from more than half a dozen other sheriff's departments, together with dog teams, the California Highway Patrol, and the Governor's Office of Emergency Services, combed the forest on foot, while helicopters from California Air National Guard did an aerial search. The search focused around the area where her car was found, but there was no sign of Sandra. Then on August 9th, 2020, 2 hunters saw a woman leaning against a tree along Road 5S01 near Beasore Road. She did not wave them down, attempt contact, or appear to be in any distress. Upon returning, they recognized her from a missing persons flyer and contacted park rangers. The hunters said that she appears to be visibly thinner than her last known photos. At the time of her disappearance, Sandra was a 54-year-old white female with blue shoulder-length hair. Her natural color is brown. She has brown eyes, is approximately 5 foot 3 inches tall, and weighs about 150 pounds. The search for Sandra was ongoing but limited. Now, flash forward to almost exactly 1 year later. This strange update to the case comes from the Madera County Sheriff's Office in Madera, California. It seems that a family from nearby Coarse Gold, California, experienced a bizarre broad daylight ghost sighting in the Madera County Mountains on Wednesday, July 21st, 2021. The event was so strange and disturbing that the Madera County Sheriff's Office felt the need to further investigate. It seems that a man named Jake Gorba, his wife Victoria, and their 3 children decided to take their four-wheeler up to the Shut-Eye Peak on that fateful Wednesday. While on this family outing, they stopped to have something to eat beside the trail, and that's when things started to get strange. The couple's 3-year-old son, Caden, suddenly began animatedly talking to someone nearby. He was just in our four-wheeler, and he was pointing out to a certain spot in the meadow, said his mom, Victoria. The normally reserved and somewhat quiet Caden excitedly told his parents that there in the meadow by where the family was having lunch was a woman lying face down with her legs straight up in the air. Furthermore, Caden stated that the woman was unable to speak or move and needed help. He began pleading with his parents to help this poor woman. He flat out told us, "Mom, she's already dead, but she needs our help." And that's when I got the goosebumps. I was like, "Oh my gosh," Victoria said. He goes, "Yeah, there's a lady over in the meadow in a black shirt, blue jeans, and blue hair." And I got goosebumps, said Victoria. He says, "She needs our help, but she's dead and she's lying face down with her legs up. She can't talk to me, but she's over there. We need to go help her." So, in order to calm young Caden down, Jake and Victoria walked over and checked out the meadow, but saw absolutely nothing. Caden continued to insist. He kept saying, trust me, Mom." And I was like, I trust you. I believe you 100%, said Victoria. Whatever young Caden was experiencing so unnerved and spooked the rest of the family that the other members of the family all unanimously agreed it's time to put an early end to their day of adventure and make the 35-mile drive back home to Coarse Gold. After arriving home, the event still fresh in her mind, Victoria decided to post about the weird encounter on her Facebook profile. We put it on Facebook to see if anybody knew anything about this area, and come to find out, There was a lady missing, with a description that he described to us, within a 5-mile radius of where we were, said Victoria. Now, as viewers of this channel know from our previous episode number 7, Sandra Hughes had gone missing in that area in June of 2020. The encounter became even more chilling when, according to Victoria, 3-year-old Caden's highly detailed description of the woman he had seen in the meadow was identical to the description of Sandra Hughes as given by the local authorities. He was very adamant that we needed to help her, and he described her down to blue hair. He said she has a black shirt, blue jeans, and blue hair, Mom. That's the exact description of her when she went missing, said Victoria. Then Victoria went and searched online for Sandra Hughes and found some photographs that had been released as a part of the search effort the year prior. Victoria said she got goosebumps when Caden readily recognized 3 of the photos of Sandra, identifying her as the woman he had seen in the field. As fate would have it, Madera County Sheriff Corporal Chris Williams just happened to see the Facebook post and found it intriguing, to say the least. So much so that he contacted Caden's family to further investigate the chilling account. Victoria said the corporal in charge of her case actually reached out to us on Facebook and was like, "Hey, we want more information and we want to bring you guys back up there and see if you could point us in the right direction." Corporal Williams has been investigating the disappearance of Sandra Hughes since the beginning of the investigation. On the following Thursday, 2 Madera County Sheriff's deputies ventured back up to the meadow to investigate, with Jake and Caden coming along to point them in the right direction. Unfortunately, the deputies found nothing new by way of evidence, although the case remains open. If she was possibly a ghost looking for some help, I hope that he could have at least helped and maybe helped the family find her, because it's been a long time apparently since she's been gone, Victoria said. The 4-wheeler that Caden and his family used while traveling in the mountains has now been nicknamed the Ghost Runner, and incidentally is also for sale. It's not believed that the spooky encounter is the reason they put the vehicle up for sale, as the family says they will continue to go adventuring in the Madera Mountains, but do admit there are a few spots now which they aren't anxious to visit again anytime soon, if at all. Local news reporters in the area reached out to the Madera County Sheriff's Office, who did confirm that they received a report of a possible sighting of some sort, and they did go out to the location to search for any additional leads or information. For now, the case remains open in hopes that this latest update regarding the spooky encounter may produce some new leads. Now, as strange as this new development is, it's not the first time that possibly a ghost helped solve a missing persons case. Back on February 21st, 1997, the TV show Unsolved Mysteries aired a segment regarding a missing persons case from almost 3 years prior. This report told the story of 23-year-old Christine Skubish and her 3-year-old son Nick. They were driving along Highway 50 in the Sierra Nevada mountain range in California when they vanished without a trace on June 6, 1994. Christine was a single mother and had recently completed paralegal training. She had plans of going to work for a prestigious law firm, and she hoped to make enough money so that she and her child's father could be married. Christine left her step-parents' home near Sacramento on June 5, 1994, on her way to Carson City, Nevada. After failing to make contact with her family after 3 days, her stepfather, Dave Stotzenbach, reported her and her son missing on June 8th. The police took the missing persons report, but there were no initial leads in the case. 5 days after Christine and Nick disappeared, however, a woman named Deborah Hoyt and her husband were driving along Highway 50 around 3 a.m. The pair were on a long overnight drive and had been joking and singing in order to keep each other awake. Suddenly, Deborah saw what appeared to be a completely naked woman lying on the side of the road. The naked woman's face was turned toward the road, and she was laying on her side with her knees slightly bent. She had one arm placed beneath her head and the other arm held over her head. The Hoyts were shocked beyond belief. They thought it must have been some sort of sick practical joke, or perhaps even a ploy to carjack them had they stopped. Deborah floored the accelerator instead and sped down Highway 50, not stopping until she arrived at the nearest phone booth, where she proceeded to call the police. In just minutes, 2 sheriff's cars were at the scene where Deborah had seen the naked woman's body. However, unable to pinpoint the exact location, the deputies reported that they saw and found nothing. The next morning, though, Speculations began that the sighting had something to do with the disappearance of Christine and Nick, who were the most recently missing people from that area. Due to the insistence from the family, Deputy Rich Strasser decided to go back and have a closer look. Strasser figured that it might be easier to spot anything out of the ordinary in the daylight. Deborah had indicated that a particularly dangerous stretch of Highway 50, known as Bullion Bend, was where the incident took place. As Strasser patrolled the area, he spotted a new-looking child's tennis shoe on the side of the road. Immediately next to that spot, in the shoulder of the road, was a steep embankment. Strasser pulled over his cruiser to search the area more thoroughly, and sure enough, at the bottom of the embankment, he spotted the twisted remains of Christine's car. He checked Christine and observed that she was dead and unfortunately had been that way for quite some time. The deputy then went around to the other side to check Nick, who was curled up in a fetal position in the passenger seat. Strasser assumed the worst and was sure that Nick was also dead. However, when he touched the little boy's neck to find a pulse, it appeared that Nick took a breath. Strasser immediately radioed for an ambulance. Little Nick had been alone in the car for 5 days, yet he was somehow still clinging to life. Officials believe that sometime around 2 a.m. on June 6th, Christine must have fallen asleep at the wheel. The car veered off the road and plunged to the bottom of the ditch, striking a tree. Due to the embankment being so steep, other drivers drove right past the accident scene for days, unaware that it was just over the side of the road. It was later determined that Christine had been killed instantly on impact with a tree. 3-year-old Nick was all alone with no way out and no one to talk to. Christine's mother says that she believes that little Nick spent the time talking to his mother, unaware that she was dead. Against all odds, he survived 5 days of intense heat and 4 nights of cold, trapped within the twisted remains of the car. Doctors who examined Nick stated that he was in such bad shape that he would have most likely died within a couple of hours had he not been found when he was. The strange encounter that saved Nick's life seems to defy any rational explanation. If Deborah had not seen the naked woman lying on the side of the road, Nick would have not survived. Now, it's absolutely impossible for Christine to have been the naked woman. She was still fully clothed and wearing her seatbelt when found, and the medical examiner stated that she was most likely killed on impact. Deborah Hoyt is 100% certain that she saw a naked woman on the side of the road. Both she and Christine's family believe it was Christine's spirit who saved Nick that day. The spirit had apparently appeared in the nude in order to draw attention. Nick, years later as an adult, was interviewed on a television show, Paranormal Witness. He remembers seeing a bright light surrounding the car following the accident. To this day, he believes that his mother was watching over him following the accident and helped him to be rescued. The show also revealed that Christine's aunt had several dreams or premonitions about the accident before Christine and Nick were even reported missing. She dreamed of seeing them lying in their car in a ditch. She also saw the number 16 in the dream, which turned out to be the number for the mile marker nearest to the accident site. Well, there you have it. What do you think about the apparition that little Caden observed, which she identified as Sandra Hughes, even down to the color of her hair, which was dyed blue when she went missing? Is it possible that Sandra's spirit is attempting to communicate with the living in a desire that her remains be found and her friend and loved ones have closure? It certainly appears that way. And what about the 2 other times she was spotted by hikers? Was that actually her, or was that an apparition? Hello, friends. Today we'll be discussing 3 very strange wilderness disappearances. Now, 2 of these cases remain unsolved, and one of these cases is a very remarkable story of a young man who survived for over 70 days lost in a forest. So sit back and relax, have a listen. This is going to be a wild one. First up, Stephen Vanpelt, the missing climber who vanished after he fell. Now, Mount Jefferson is the 2nd tallest mountain in Oregon, and the only major volcanic center in the United States portion of the Cascade Range that hasn't erupted in the past 10,000 years. It stands at a majestic 10,495 feet tall and is part of the Cascade Range. According to climbing aficionados, the mountain summit pinnacle requires Class 4 scrambling on very steep, usually ice-encrusted rock. It is considered by some to be the most difficult of the higher volcanoes. It is indeed a rough mountain to climb, and visitors are warned, mountain to climb indeed, and visitors are warned numerous times not to try and complete the summit unless they are very experienced climbers. In this community, we've seen many types of accidents happen and mysteries begin in places like Mount Jefferson. Mother Nature can be a cruel mistress, and when there are no answers to seemingly obvious questions, it can be downright frustrating. Such is the mystery of what happened to Stephen Vanpelt. If a person falls off a mountain, it would make sense that they would be found right at the bottom, somewhere near at least, from where they fell. Yes, that would make sense. It would almost make too much sense for this community that deals in mysteries just like this all the time. Stephen Vanpelt seems to have fallen off the mountain and right off the face of the earth. Let's delve a little deeper into the mysterious fall and the equally mysterious vanishing of Stephen Vanpelt. On Friday, July 23, 2021, at around 11:45 in the morning, a 33-year-old Salem, Oregon resident named Stephen Vanpelt was descending Mount Jefferson when he suddenly fell off the mountain and disappeared from the view of his climbing partner. The Marion County Sheriff's Office received the initial report and responded along with Linn County deputies and the Linn County Search and Rescue Team. Officials reported that this particular area of the mountain where Stephen had his fall is extremely dangerous and would require technical mountaineers to travel the mountainside in their search efforts. Initially, it was reported that Stephen hadn't been found right away because of terrain which included snow and large boulders. There were also deep cliffs, crevices, rocks, and scree. Now, for this example, scree is defined as a mass of loose stones that form or cover a slope of a mountain. So basically, his recovery was going to take some time. The deputies called in several other agencies to assist him in the search for Stephen, and these included Corvallis Mountain Rescue, Eugene Mountain Rescue, Deschutes Mountain Rescue, and Portland Mountain Rescue. Stephen Vanpelt worked at Salem's Morning Star Community Church as a program director. After his fall from the mountain, his sister posted on social media that it is believed Stephen ended up in a ravine that is inaccessible. However, it's also been stated that Stephen was not seen in or around this ravine when it was looked over. The search was eventually suspended, and it was determined that Stephen would not be able to be recovered. He was never found. A statement written on behalf of his family said, "There is no more appropriate tombstone for Steve than Mount Jefferson." His wife, Caitlin, said that it's a huge comfort knowing her husband had come to rest in Mount Jefferson, and said he would have been thrilled to call this mountain his headstone. Obviously, Stephen Vanpelt loved the mountains and mountain climbing. His sister's social media post explains that he and his climbing partner had an incredible day together, and Steve was on cloud 9 after they summited the 10,495-foot pinnacle of Mount Jefferson. As they descended back down the mountain, Stephen's climbing partner watched him slip and fall hundreds of feet. From what Stephen's climbing partner later said, "We knew his end was immediate." Caitlin also stated how her husband loved the outdoors and how Mendocino County was a perfect place for an outdoorsman like Stephen. Before the search was officially called off, Linn County Sheriff's Office Lieutenant Brandon Fountain explained that the conditions of the terrain was becoming a hazard to all the searchers. Lieutenant Fountain continued that there's a specific drainage on Mount Jefferson where searchers believe he may have come to rest. First responders conducted a significant search of this drainage, while rock and mud from above fell on the rescuers, who were bound together by rope. Stephen's sister posted, "My brother is, and always has been, a part of this mountain. He is, and always has been, a part of this rugged landscape. He is, and has always been, a part of this wilderness. Manicured grounds could never hold him." Now, the mystery here lies in the fact that, despite all of these agencies working tirelessly together and literally exhausting themselves in their effort to find Stephen, he has never been found. There were even multiple flyovers conducted by Life Flight, and the United States Army National Guard also joined in during the subsequent days of the search. Many people have begged the question, if Stephen fell from a specific place on the mountain, and someone watched him do it and pointed authorities to that exact spot, then why wasn't Stephen there at the bottom? Is he really there? These questions may never be answered. And while we respect the authorities and family's belief that Stephen has simply fallen into an area where it is impossible for him to be recovered, we have to wonder if he is actually there. As always, we hope someday the family is able to know for sure that Stephen is indeed resting at the bottom of his beloved mountain somewhere, and our thoughts and prayers are with his family and loved ones. Next up, Fola Marie Miranda Rosa. On December 31st, 2021, the search for missing 31-year-old Fola Marie Miranda Rosa resumed at Wekiva River in Wekiva Springs Park, an area north of Orlando, Florida. Sources say 2 hikers in the area took footage and photos of the missing woman on December 19th, 2021, which was the day after her family reported her missing. Her family positively identified her in the footage. The unnamed hikers said they observed the woman swimming in the river and took a couple pictures because it was so unusual to see someone swimming there. Miranda Rosa has been missing since then. Her family had reported her missing the day after they last saw her on Friday, December 17th, 2021, a day spent visiting with family and having lunch together. Fola was said to have been in good spirits and nothing appeared to be wrong. No one heard from her after she left the family home that day, and she was reported missing that Sunday. On Monday, her family made flyers to put up around the parks and businesses in the area surrounding it. She never used to go out and leave her dogs alone at her house. She left with the purpose of returning to her home. We do not know what happened that she did not return. She did not go back to her home, Yvonne Rose, Fola's mother, told Telemundo 31 in a phone interview. Ms. Rosa went on to say that her daughter's past mental health problems could have been a part of her getting confused and becoming lost. It remains unclear if it's a factor in her disappearance. She also stated that her daughter may need help finding her way back home. We immediately felt something was wrong. It's just not normal, Ms. Rosa continued in the Telemundo interview. Now, Fola has battled schizophrenia in the past and has been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Foul play isn't suspected at this time, the Osceola County Sheriff's Department says. Prior to the official search, the Sheriff's Office released a statement saying they plan to search 4.5 miles of the river around the area where Fola was last seen, using special underwater camera equipment that has the capability to see in hard-to-reach areas that can't be explored by standard scuba equipment. They planned on searching the wooded areas on both sides of the river as well. Just days later, they began a 3-day search. 150 law enforcement officers searched the park with scuba divers, boats, drones, volunteers, and bloodhounds. There were even volunteers on horseback, which helped pace the search. On December 21st, 2021, Fola's car was found at the park, along with her wallet, purse, phone, and other personal items, and the keys were in the unlocked car, which is yet another strange circumstance in Fola's disappearance. Her family spent the holiday season without Fola for the first time ever. Her sister, Andrea Miranda, told Fox News 35, "It's hard to even focus on the fact that it's the holiday season. I don't even know what day it is right now. We see Christmas lights all around us. We see that. But you're tunnel vision on the mission of finding her. Of course, it hurts this holiday. We want to have her with us, but we have to do what we have to do." Fola's father also gave the media an interview in which he stated, "We love you. We are waiting for you. Everyone, family, your friends, and people who don't even know you. We are not giving up. We don't want anybody to give up. We want you to know that Fola was extremely loved. She loved us." Fola is described as 4 foot 10 inches tall and weighs 145 pounds. She has brown eyes and reddish-violet hair. She was wearing blue jean shorts and a white or green shirt at the time she was last seen. Some people have suggested that she may have been attacked by an alligator. State wildlife officials in Florida said attacks do happen but are rare. 6 years prior to Fola's disappearance, and in the same park, a woman was attacked by an alligator but survived. 2 other men have also been attacked in earlier years, but they survived as well. It was also reported that Fola was seen being pushed into a car, although this hasn't been verified, and the police haven't asked area businesses for video footage they may have. The family is asking that any business in that area with a camera to please turn over any footage from that day. The police and sheriff's office have asked anyone that may have information on Fola Marie Miranda Rosa's disappearance, or if you saw her after she was reported missing, to please not be afraid to share the information, even if it's wrong. Say that it turns out to be someone else. If you do have any information or tips, you're asked to please call the Osceola County Sheriff's Department at 407-348-2222 and reference Fola Miranda Rosa. Her sister Andrea finished the interview with Fola, "We love you and we want you home." Next up, Kevin Bear Henry. On February 7th, 2021, family and friends gathered to host a vigil for their friend and loved one that went missing in the wildlands of a Canadian mountain. They celebrated the amazing life accomplishments for their bear, believing they were gone forever. Lost for 74 days in the Canadian wilderness, 37-year-old Kevin Bear Henry screams for help went unheard. A Two-Spirit Indigenous person and environmental demonstrator, Henry was last seen by family members on November 27, 2021, before embarking upon a journey into the wilds of Fairy Creek, Vancouver Island, British Columbia. The weather took a turn and it started to rain. Further making the situation worse, it began to get dark. Henry, having thought they had driven too far, tried to backtrack, but it was too late. They weren't found until February 9, 2022. Driving their van through the beautiful and lush woods, headed to an old-growth area of the forest to support a protest against logging, Henry was taking a mental note of how bad the road was getting. The ruts and potholes were starting to take a toll on the old van. As they proceeded down the dirt road, the van was listing from side to side. Every few feet, the road was becoming impassable until hitting one last big pothole caused the van's engine to completely quit. Eventually, Henry was able to get the engine started again, and only a little farther down the mountain road before becoming stuck in mud caused by the treacherous rain. Thankfully, they had a sleeper van and had at least shelter, but only had provisions for a few days because they had only planned on being there for 2 to 3 days. Tired from the day's events, Henry climbed in the sleeper and rested for the night. Henry had been paralyzed for 4 years in their 20s after being stabbed. This makes walking for any substantial length almost impossible, and they were taught to stay where they were should they become lost. The first few days were spent with the van, where Henry had food and shelter. They hadn't told anyone where they were going, but could hear helicopters overhead, presumably searching for them. "No one could hear me scream," Henry said. A massive search had been launched for the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, community members, search and rescue teams, and even TikTokers had joined together in an effort to find the demonstrator. The family had reported them missing until December 11th, which was a full 2 weeks after Henry had become stuck on that road. They had also started a Facebook page dedicated to finding Bear called Bring Kevin Bear Henry Home. The page name has since been changed to Bear Has Returned. Because of the hostile environment that was created between demonstrators and the RCMP over logging, there was a delay in the search. Worsening weather conditions also hampered the search efforts. The few times they were able to search, there were a few clues found that pointed to Henry being in the area, but there was never anything found that succinctly pointed to where they may be. Surviving on anything they could get their hands on. Their diet consisted of tomatoes, dry rice soaked in water, tomato sauce, and beans. Henry even resorted to eating cat food at one point, and even snow in late December. As food supplies dwindled and days turned into weeks, Henry decided they would have to walk to help. Having walked for 15 hours over a 2-day span to the top of the road where the logging was happening, they finally stumbled into 2 loggers getting ready to leave the area. Loggers from Gemini Fallers saw Henry stumble onto their location. They were supposed to be leaving early that day and almost missed Henry standing in the area. "We thought you were a tree, man," one of the loggers told him. "Are you Bear?" the other man asked. "How do you know who I am?" Henry asked. "There are missing person posters of you everywhere in Lake Cowichan and Duncan," the men said to Bear. They didn't know what day or even month it was. "I've been missing for 3 months," Henry said to his rescuers. "Where would you like to go?" the men asked Henry where they could take them. "Tim Hortons," Henry replied, wanting a hot cup of coffee and some food. The loggers dropped Henry at a Tim Hortons in Lake Cowichan and gave them $20. "That kind of care and support to do that, that's humanity right there," Henry said of the men that rescued them. Bear contacted a friend and family members straight away. The family rushed to the Tim Hortons to make contact with them. Although a little skinnier, Bear was in good spirits. Henry would later be taken to an area hospital for an exam to make sure there were no lasting effects. "We understand there are questions on how and where the individual survived," a Royal Canadian Mounted Police spokesperson said. "If those details are released, it will have to come from Henry, as the family has asked for privacy at this time. They're just happy their loved one returned to them." There have been several updates and videos posted by Bear since their ordeal addressing people's questions and telling their story. In one of the videos, they're quoted as saying, "I'm too stubborn to die," when asked by a family member that was thinking the worst. Not having any experience with outdoor survival, Henry also said, "I definitely learned a lot more about the environment and how precious it is to be back there, to breathe that kind of fresh air, and to be at the mercy of that kind of weather, and to be at the mercy of the backcountry. It teaches you a lot." Hello, friends. Today we're going to be talking about 5 wilderness disappearances where mysterious disembodied cries for help were heard by search and rescue teams, but the person couldn't be located. You can imagine how these disembodied cries for help would have baffled search and rescue teams when they couldn't locate the missing person who had vanished in the wilderness. Likewise, the person calling out would probably wonder why they couldn't be heard. As we all know, thousands of people go missing every single day in the United States alone, and while some are found safe and sound and return to their family and loved ones, many are never seen or heard from again. How devastating that must be for the people who remain in the dark about their loved one, wondering always what if and what happened. Are they alive? Are they deceased? But what about the people who went missing and are known to have called out for help, to have actually been heard screaming or yelling for someone to rescue them, but were then never found? How does something like that even happen? Surely you must be thinking that if someone is close enough to be within earshot and heard calling for help, then search and rescue teams, volunteer teams, or even just a random stranger wandering about in the area heard them, then how is it at all possible for that person to never be seen or heard from again? Now, while we don't answer to that specific question today, and we as a society may never have all of or even part of the answers to these same questions, let's review some of these cases today. The ones in which people were so very close to being rescued or saved, but then that help never came. What must that have felt like to the person who was lost? Crying out and then hearing people who you think are coming to your aid for who knows how long, knowing that you're being heard and maybe even preparing to get ready to get back home to your family, and then nothing. Search and rescue teams or volunteers move on, possibly walking right past you to go and continue the search for you somewhere else. These are just a few of the many cases we found in which people were actually heard calling for help, but then could not be located. They were never seen or heard from again after that. Number 5, Mitchell Dale Stalling. On June 19, 2013, Mitchell Dale Stalling, known to most as Dale, his wife Dalene, and his parents went to Mesa Verde National Park in Colorado, USA. The 51-year-old Dale decided to go for a hike by himself to the Spruce Tree House Ruins. The Spruce Tree House Ruins is the third largest cliff dwelling in Mesa Verde and was actually constructed between 1211 and 1278 AD by the ancestors of some of the Pueblo people of the Southwest. This amazing dwelling contains about 130 rooms and 8 kivas, which are chambers where the ceremonies of the Pueblo people were held. This dwelling wasn't discovered until 1888 when 2 ranchers were trying to find some cattle that had gone astray and accidentally stumbled upon this beautiful piece of history. Dale had decided he wanted to see it for himself, and took off at around 4:30 p.m. with every intention of returning as soon as he was done. After all, the trail was less than a quarter of a mile long, connecting to the Petroglyph Point Trail, which is a 2.5-mile loop with cliff exposure that takes off right from the Spruce Tree Trail. Several witnesses came forward later and remembered speaking with Dale on the trail that day, but yet he never returned back to his family. It was until 7 years later that his remains were found and returned to his still hopeful and still searching family on September 17, 2020. But now let's talk about the mystery surrounding this horrible tragedy. Here's a little more about what happened to Dale Stalling that fateful day back in June of 2013. Dale and his family left their home in Goliad, Texas in a camper trailer and headed west to Colorado, a place Dale had always wanted to see and explore. He was an experienced outdoorsman and loved to camp and hike, and was also a very avid gardener and was known to spend hours alone at home just spending time and tending to his many plants. He decided a day trip to Mesa Verde National Park was the perfect way not only for his family to spend some quality time together, but also for him to make his dream of seeing the sights in the beautiful Colorado National Park a reality. And so, they were on their way. The trail was known to be a bit rough and rugged, so initially the Stallings were only planning to drive to the lookout point and experience the breathtaking scenes from a distance. Dale's parents were elderly, and it's reported that his wife was overweight, so nobody but Dale would have been able to hike the trail very easily. Once they got there, however, Dale being Dale and having his great love of nature and the outdoors, decided to seize the moment and finally have the opportunity he had waited for so long, to be there in Colorado, in the Mesa Verde. He just had to get a closer look at the Spruce Tree House ruins. 22 minutes before Dale took off for his hike, the weather conditions were not that good. The temperature was somewhere between 90 and 100 degrees. The terrain was another worry, as it was rugged with steep canyons and mesa tops. The elevation ranged from 6,500 to 8,000 feet. The hike to the top of the trail, Dale estimated, would take about an hour. This was the average length of time for someone in good health to have made it through. Dale was reported missing very soon after he didn't return at the agreed-upon time. His family didn't want to leave much room for anything bad to have happened and got on to finding him right away. The Rangers first thought Dale had just gotten probably a bit off track and told his wife to give him a few more hours, and if he didn't return by then, to go ahead then and report him missing. According to a park public information officer, the park has never had anyone go missing for more than a couple of hours. Once it had indeed been 2 hours after he was supposed to have been back, the park initiated a 2-week-long search and rescue operation, which included around 60 searchers, 2 dog teams, helicopter surveillance, and rope teams rappelling off the cliffs in the Chapin Mesa area. This is where the canine teams had initially shown some interest in the first couple of days of the search, so this is where they decided to begin. The Petroglyph Point Trail follows a cliff base before descending to the mesa in a series of steep sections of switchbacks, which then had some steps cut into the rock. Though he didn't have any water with him on this extremely hot day when he disappeared, Dale did have his cell phone, but after he was determined to have disappeared, nobody could get any kind of response or an answer from him when they tried to reach out. Phone records did show him trying to access his voicemail at around 7 p.m. that night, or at least the phone was trying to access the voicemail. We in this community should make no assumptions that it was Dale at all who tried to do this. For the sake of fact, though, let's move on and say it was him. It was for nothing, though, as the call dropped and never went through. According to Patrick O'Driscoll of National Parks Media Services, the Intermountain region, the majority of Mesa Verde, aside from the few marked trails, is uncharted territory, and therefore technically off-limits to hikers. Approximately 5 to 10 people go missing every year in the Mesa Verde National Park, and none of these cases are officially closed, including Dale's, until that person or their body is found. Authorities have shared everything from actual case files to random tips with the family, but Dale's wife, Dalene, sees things much differently than park officials do. She says she is pissed off and feels the search only really lasted for 2 days, and then Dale was just given up on. She stated, "Now that it's been a year, and honestly, the more I reflect on it, I'm just pissed off." Their attitude was, he was there, he was lost, and what are they supposed to do about it? Park officials say, however, that rangers in the park were still searching for Dale 3 months later, though in a bit more scaled-back way. They insist they did this to keep Dale and his disappearance on their radar, so everyone would continue to be on the lookout for him. In 2014, Dalene returned at least 14 times to the park, and is more convinced than ever that her husband had gone missing due to misleading markers and signs in the park, which caused him to accidentally go off trail. She believes he thought he was following all the signs properly, but because they were so confusing, he ended up lost anyway. There is a very interesting account written by a hiker and writer named Jody Peterson, however, that was written in 2013, which details an experience she had while hiking the same trail on the same day as Dale when he went missing. She writes in part, "After an hour of walking, I suddenly heard a weary male voice call, 'I need some help.' I thought of the missing hiker. Perhaps after visiting Spruce Treehouse, he'd attempted the trail and run into trouble. I called out several times but got no response. I thought about going off trail to look, but figured then I'd become victim number 2 if I tried to scramble down those ledges and cliffs. My cell phone had no signal. I hiked back down the trail as fast as I could, and when I found the chief ranger, I told him what I'd heard. Relief washed over his face as another staffer said, 'We thought we heard a call for help in that area yesterday.' They quickly began planning to bring in dogs and more searchers. I left the ranger station and stood looking at the opposite side of the canyon where I'd heard the call for help. I said a silent prayer. When I got back to my western Colorado home the following day, I checked the news thinking that I'd read that the hiker had been found. Instead, I learned that Mitchell Dale Stalling was still missing, and now 70 people were looking for him. As I write this, it's been almost 2 weeks since Stalling vanished, and the search has been scaled down. A group of us think he's still somewhere in the park, said Chief Ranger Jesse Farias. We've all heard of planned disappearances, but it doesn't smell that way. The odds of him being found alive, though, are basically 0. Perhaps he fell between big rocks in a place where searchers can't see him. Perhaps wind shifts made the dog miss his scent. Now, the question, though, is this. If Dale was heard calling for help by several different people, and searches were immediately put into place and conducted as soon as this was reported, then how did no one come across him again, even hear him again, or find any evidence of him at all? If they thought they heard a call for help in the same area just the day before, then why weren't they still out searching there? That makes no sense. What really happened out there in Mesa Verde? Do the park rangers and other staff of this national park know more than they're saying? This is something to think about, definitely, but most likely something we will never find an answer to. Number 4, Dalene Moch Pua. On February 27, 2015, a 17-year-old named Dalene Pua, known as Moch to his family and friends, decided to go for a hike on the Stairway to Heaven. This is actually the Haiku Stairs in Oahu, Hawaii. These stairs are basically an extremely steep step structure which used to provide pedestrian access to former U.S. Navy communication facilities on the island. This is considered one of Hawaii's most dangerous trails, and Moch was last seen boarding a bus in Waianae to get to the spot which he wanted so badly to climb and see the historical sites. Dalene, who lived on the Big Island, was visiting Waianae to spend some time with his grandmother. His grandmother, Martha Bear, stated that the teen wanted desperately to climb the trail, which is forbidden on the windward side of Oahu. She told her grandson she had seen on the news that it was closed down and he wouldn't be able to access it. She told him not to waste his time even trying. Martha said, though, that when Dalene boarded the bus and said he was going hiking, she never thought he was really going there, to the Stairway to Heaven trail. She figured she'd already told him that he would get arrested if he tried to go there and climb, and that it was closed down and pedestrian access was being refused. At around 11 a.m., Dalene posted his last ever correspondence when he texted some friends pictures of himself, stating that he was finally there, on the trail of the Haiku Stairs, and was next planning to climb them. He hasn't been seen or heard from since. His family studied the pictures Dalene had sent them from the trail right before he seemingly disappeared into thin air extensively, and there are some that stand out. These are the ones they are desperately trying to get the public's help in identifying. Unfortunately, the more you blow up the images, the more blurry and non-discernible they become. Almost impossible to tell what you're even looking at. Though the family is fairly confident at least one of them is Dalene. They believe they saw a man in the background, far off in the distance of at least one of the other pictures, and theorized that this man was for some reason following Dalene and could have somehow led to his disappearance and possible demise. The search effort included local fire departments, drone operators, community volunteers, and even the U.S. Navy, conducting a land and air search to find the young man, all to no avail. A few days after he was last heard from and reported as missing, Monday, March 2nd, 2 hikers reported hearing cries for help. This information led the fire department to continue their search into Tuesday, March 3rd, 2015. That particular search was suspended the same afternoon, but local volunteers continued to look for Dalene, combing through the mountains, but finding no sign of him. The haiku stairs have been closed to the public since 1987, but are still a very popular hike with locals and tourists alike willing to risk fines or arrest. The stairs are in bad shape after heavy rains and powerful storms have damaged them to the point that they've gained a somewhat ominous reputation for being not only treacherous, but possibly deadly as well. Some people believe they should be fixed, restored, and reopened to the public, while others say they should be torn down altogether. The fate of Dalene Moch is still unknown to this day, as is why he wasn't found despite hikers very clearly hearing him calling for help. Was this actually Dalene Pua crying out for help? Again, we will most likely never know. Number 3, Philip Kasich. Yet another unfortunate soul who decided to go out for what seemed like a pleasant and scenic hike and ended up not ever being seen or heard from again, even after being heard screaming or yelling for help, is 30-year-old Philip Kasich from Berkeley, California. Philip told his wife he was headed out for a run in the hills near the Mahler Ranch staging area in Pleasanton Ridge Regional Park, California. He called her once he reached the trail to inform her that it would take him about an hour and to let her know when she could expect him back that day. He was last seen running at around 10:45 a.m. that same morning. Philip's wife reported him missing the same afternoon he had headed out for the run when he failed to return home and hadn't been in contact with her or anyone else to let them know why he wasn't back yet. This was very unlike him by all accounts. Investigators in Pleasanton stated that they had never come across such a bizarre case. Either he got hurt and was only able to call out, or he planned all of this and purposely disappeared, leaving his wife and his life behind and never looking back. This left his family and friends to wonder forever what happened to him and why. According to his family, the latter isn't even an option, as Philip just wasn't that type of man and loved his life and his family. Philip was supposed to meet with his wife to attend a family gathering in Stockton, California. When he didn't show up at the appointed time, his wife immediately knew something was wrong and called the authorities. Philip was said to have left his shirt and cell phone in his vehicle, and although he was running with a smartwatch, it was unfortunately not equipped with GPS. With temperatures rising above 100 degrees Fahrenheit that day in Pleasanton, many were led to immediately begin to speculate that the heat had somehow incapacitated Philip on that day, July 10th, 2021. Now, this didn't make much sense to his family and loved ones, though, as Philip was a marathon runner and was well adjusted to running under such extreme conditions as blaring heat, which might incapacitate most people. His cell phone showed that his route was planned out entirely along very well-maintained and manicured trails. Though the park was packed with people that day, not a single credible sighting of Philip has ever been reported. Sergeant Aaron Fountain of the Pleasanton Police Department, who's handling the investigation, said, "I can't even speculate on this one. It's very, very odd." Now to continue, Philip Kasich was a family man with 2 small children and also a graduate of the prestigious Harvard University in Boston, Massachusetts. He was also listed as a third-year student in MIT's Urban Mobility Lab. Philip went missing on a Saturday, and the following Wednesday, a family hiking in the area reported hearing cries in a canyon near the Sunol Post Office. After receiving this tip, 2 people who were involved in the search went out to the area and heard for themselves a man screaming for help near the canyon. Experienced hikers in the search and rescue effort set out to go and see if they could hear the calls and perhaps follow them to try and find Philip, who they presumed it was, and bring him safely back to his family. However, once arriving at the spot where the cries for help were allegedly heard by multiple people at this point, they heard nothing and weren't able to locate Philip either. That same night, the search efforts were officially called off, and Philip hasn't been found as of this video being made, almost a month later. Theories run wild as to what happened to Philip Kasich. From demented and murderous drug dealers taking him hostage, to large felines somehow carrying him up trees and feasting, to him just walking off and abandoning his life, which he was said to love so much. However, that's just what these are, theories, as there hasn't been any evidence as to if this was definitely Philip who was heard crying from the canyon for help that fateful day. Again, why didn't the first two experienced hikers who were sent out and did claim to have heard at least someone crying for help never find him? This is another case that is completely and totally baffling and runs along the exact vein as the previous two and the cases to follow. We'll never know. Surely, if he was attacked and eaten by wild animals, there would have been some sort of trail for either the animal searchers or even the human ones to find and follow, at least leading to some sort of explanation. Signs of a struggle, blood, torn clothing, etc. We'll just have to wait and see on this one. Do have an update here. While this video was in editing, Philip was found deceased. We'll create a new case update video very soon to discuss this with you. Philip, rest in peace, my friend. Number 2, Linda Artega. On September 22nd, 2012, 53-year-old Linda Artega left her home in Blackwell, Oklahoma, and headed out to the woods in the Arkansas Ozarks near St. Joe. Linda was with her brother, and they were visiting with her sister when, somewhat ironically, her brother offered to take her into the woods and teach her some survival skills. She somehow became separated from him and ended up lost in the woods for 5 days. The story she told of her experience is strange to say the least. However, in this community, if you clicked on this video or you're aware of all the strange things happening in the woods, besides all the bizarre deaths and disappearances, and if you've been paying attention at all and can clearly see something is wrong with not only the things mentioned above, but also with the reports and stories of encounters and experiences had by the people who were lost for however long in whatever part of the 700 million acres of forest and woodlands in the United States alone, then you'll understand why it was absolutely necessary that we tell Linda's story here. Now, as soon as she was reported missing, a search was mounted, and almost every single resident of St. Joe, which is a tiny town of not even 200 people, and various other volunteers from throughout the county, set out to find the missing woman. She was eventually found, relatively unharmed, and picked up by an all-terrain vehicle driven by some of these volunteers. Linda was lucky enough to have only sustained some minor cuts and bruises, but what happened to her affected her psychologically, and it was definitely a strange story she had to tell. Chief Deputy Dwayne Pierce stated that when she came out of the woods, she wasn't right about her head. That's a quote. Miss Artega reported that she had survived by eating wild berries, watercress, hazelnuts, and anything else she could find which she knew was edible. She also drank water from the creek. At night, she huddled on the freezing cold ground underneath trees for shelter, praying for someone to come and finally find her. She also repeatedly thanked her brother and insisted she never would have survived without the knowledge he had just been teaching her about how to survive in the wild. The strangest and scariest part of the entire 5-day ordeal, though, was what Linda said she had experienced while out there, lost and alone, cold and afraid, in the unknown woods and trails. She claimed that while she was out there, especially at night, she would see other people there. They would be walking around her along the trails or even right there in the thick of the woods. She would ask them for help or try to get their attention, maybe even ask one of them if they could point her in the direction of safety. However, not a single one of these people even acknowledged her or looked in her direction. She claimed people were even hiding behind the bushes like they didn't want her to see them. Now, while in the hospital, she did admit that perhaps some of the berries she had eaten caused some kind of mild hallucination. She wasn't sure. She claimed she had managed to stay with her brother for 3 days before becoming separated from him and knew what she should and what she shouldn't eat when trying to survive. She's very consistent in her story. Think about the people hiding in the bushes. These people definitely weren't part of any kind of search party. Why would people trying to find a lost woman hide so she couldn't see them? More than that, how much more interesting that she was berry picking when she ended up being separated from her brother after 3 days of staying right next to him. As we all know, this is a very common theme among the missing people in the woods, the berry picking, or berry patches in general. But there are those who are found, and then those who seem to be forever lost. Linda is not the first person, or more specifically, the first woman, to report things like this while either lost or, for whatever reason, wandering the woods alone. There are many other reports of women being followed or even chased by what they referred to as men while being lost in those same woods. This is also very common in the east along the Appalachian Trail. Think back to the story of little Dennis Martin and how a family out for a hike or camping trip saw what they referred to as a wild man carrying something which looked like a small child over its shoulder. There are also several park rangers in the United States, Dwight McCarter among them, who have come forward since retiring and tell stories of wild men living and even hunting in the woods of our national parks and general forested areas of our country. Is this only going on here in the United States, though? Not at all. There's one specific report we covered in an early video about wild men and feral humans in the woods where at least one park ranger was attacked by one of these people. Now, luckily, Linda was able to keep her wits about her despite what must have been petrifying fear, and she made a full recovery after her harrowing ordeal. Number 1. Naomi Lee Whidden. On November 25, 1994, Dwayne Whidden decided to take his son, age 6, and 2 daughters, ages 2 and 3, for a hike in the Chattahoochee National Forest. He parked the car at the base of a large mountain there at the trailhead, unloaded his children, and off they went for a day of family fun together. Dwayne and his 3 kids hiked about 1.5 miles up an old logging trail and into the deep wilderness of the forest. Later on, when recounting the incident of what happened and how Naomi had come to be lost in the woods, he stated, "They, meaning his children, were in my full view, my sight and hearing, and then she was gone." He stated that they were all looking for signs of animals when suddenly Naomi, only 2 years old, just simply vanished. There was never any explanation we could find of what actually happened and how it was possible a 2-year-old little girl, in full view of her father no less, disappeared faster than he could finish blinking. It's like she blinked right out of existence. Local authorities brought in bloodhounds and search teams from the surrounding counties to aid in the search for the small girl. Teams of volunteers and search and rescue headed out well into the middle of the night looking for Naomi and calling her name, but to no avail. She was seemingly nowhere at all. Now, approximately 25 hours after she first disappeared, a man named Kip Clayton was searching the outer fringes of the search area he and his team were assigned to when he said his intuition, that old gut instinct, pushed him forth to go and search another 250 yards forward, leaving the official search area he was looking in. But that's when he found her. Laying next to a large log, face down and unresponsive in mud, muck, and leaves, was 2-year-old Naomi Whidden. He picked her up and she let out a small moan. She was freezing cold, her body at a dangerously low temperature, and Kip ran as fast as he could with Naomi barely breathing in his arms, the approximate mile back to the command post. Naomi was rushed to the nearest hospital, and she was only semi-conscious and in very critical condition when she arrived. Now, while eventually she fully recovered and managed to survive her ordeal, many questions remain about what exactly happened to her. As mentioned before, where Naomi was found was only about 250 yards away from where the searchers would have been screaming and yelling her name the night before, all throughout the night. Why didn't Naomi respond to them at all? Why didn't she alert them in any way as to where she was so they could go and help her? It isn't possible that she was face down in the mud the entire time, or she couldn't have survived. Surely she would have suffocated. So why didn't she respond? Did she not hear them? If she couldn't hear them, why not? Take into account when trying to understand these things, how close this disappearance was to the Great Smoky Mountains, and how many children not only have disappeared there, but were found face down on the ground. Usually, the ones closest to Naomi's age are found this way. Sometimes, though, it's too late. Naomi was very lucky to have survived. Also, why doesn't a simple Google search turn up more information about this case? Other than one document, there's not any mention of this online anywhere. Hello, friends. Steve Stockton here. In this episode, we're going to take a look at some bizarre disappearances from hospitals. Join me. Let's walk and see. First up, we have the story of Joan Gay Croft. On April 9, 1947, the deadliest tornado ever to hit Oklahoma went raging through parts of the state. A monstrous and deadly Class F5 was a maelstrom of wind and debris, and it ripped through parts of Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas. At some point, it blew a path through the town of Woodward, Oklahoma, leaving in its wake chaos, destruction, tragedy, and death. In the end, 185 people were deceased, 1,000 more were injured, and it was the beginning of one of the strangest unsolved mysteries in Oklahoma's history. Although many people tragically lost their lives to the whirling cyclone of death, there were many, many more who were spared. One of those who was lucky enough to have escaped death's clutches was a 4-year-old named Joan Gay Croft. Joan's mother had been killed in the natural disaster, and her stepfather had been critically injured, but Joan herself had come away from the brush with death with a non-life-threatening injury in the form of a piece of wood that penetrated her leg. She was found and rushed to the hospital for treatment, along with her sister, Jerry, who had also suffered non-life-threatening injuries. There was obviously a huge influx of seriously injured people, some on the brink of death due to the storm, and so the girls were quickly and easily treated and then relegated to the basement of the overcrowded hospital, as it had been transformed into a shelter where many refugees from the tornado were being housed and treated. They were there for a night, and things were chaotic and sad, but they got through it together. The next day, 2 men in what were described as khaki army uniforms went into the hospital and made their way down to the basement. They went straight for Joan and tried escorting her out of the basement in front of everyone else, which by now was at least a few hundred people, despite the little girl's loud protests and screaming. They knew who she was because when they first entered the basement, they'd ask a member of the overworked and overtired staff who she was, asked for her by name, specifically, and the staff member pointed her out. They didn't seem to be interested in anyone but the 4-year-old girl. Joan screamed and cried, pleading with the men not to make her leave her sister, and the men patiently comforted her, telling her that they were friends and that she would be back there in just a few hours to collect Jerry so they could be brought to wherever they were going together. The hospital staff realized what was going on after seeing the commotion and tried their best to intervene, and as they did, the men were very calm and composed, seemingly very professional, and they then explained that they were merely taking the girls, Joan first and then Jerry, to another hospital where the girls' relatives were waiting for them. Somehow, the men were allowed to leave with the little girl, as apparently that explanation was deemed good enough for whoever was in charge. But no one ever returned with Joan, and she was never seen or heard from again. Nobody ever saw the 2 men again either. Eventually, it was discovered that Joan had vanished and had more than likely been abducted. And when that happened, a major manhunt was launched for her, but it turned up almost nothing at all. In fact, her kidnappers have never been identified, and no trace of them or Joan has ever been found. The case gained international coverage, which meant it was a big deal at the time, a time when most cases didn't get much further than the local media and news. And in the years to come, it spawned many anniversary articles asking what could have happened to the little girl and who her alleged abductors were. On May 22, 1993, the case was covered on the show Unsolved Mysteries, and it featured a full dramatic reenactment of the whole bizarre event. Interestingly enough, many women have come forward throughout the years claiming to be the adult Joan Gay Croft, but those leads have never gone anywhere, and all the women have been ruled out either genetically or by some other means. In 1999, a woman came forward to the editor of the newspaper, The Oklahoman, claiming to be Joan, but she then ceased all communication after the initial contact and failed to show up for the planned meeting with the editor. This happened again with a woman living in Canada, and obviously no one knows whether or not either of those women would have been the long-lost little girl. Despite dozens of women throughout the decades who claim to be the little girl, none of them have ever proven to be, and that leaves us with nothing but theories to go on, as Joan Gay Croft is still listed as a missing person. Most people believe she was kidnapped, due to obvious reasons, but that doesn't explain the series of bizarre events that happened leading up to the alleged abduction. Who were the men? How did they know about Joan, who she was, and where she was? Why were they specifically looking for her out of the dozens of other kids who had been orphaned or at least stranded in the shelter due to the devastation of the tornado? And why not take her sister too? They knew her name, and so they must have known at least of her, but what did they want and how were they able to publicly take her yet leave behind no clues or traces and never be seen again? For their part, Joan's family believes that some other family lost their daughter in the disaster and wanted to replace her with Joan. But, just like everything else, there's never been any proof to that theory. Simply put, no one knows what happened to Joan Gay Croft, and more than likely, no one ever will. Next up, we have Jerry Irwin. Another strange vanishing that has more than just a little bizarre and unexplained element to it is the disappearance of Private First Class Jerry Irwin. On March 2, 1959, Jerry woke up in a hospital in Cedar City, Utah, with no memory of how he ended up there in the first place. He had reportedly been unconscious for 23 hours, during which time he had been talking in his sleep and saying something about the jacket on the brush. When he came to, he asked the hospital staff if there were any survivors, but no one knew what he meant by that. Survivors of what? No one knew, including Jerry himself. Finally, though, he became lucid enough to tell his story, and it seemed like his memory was coming back to him. He told the staff that he had just been off on a leave of absence and on his way home from Napa, Idaho, going to Fort Bliss in El Paso, Texas, where he was stationed. He said he was a technician for Nike Air Missiles and that after he had reached Cedar City, he had been driving along Route 14 when he looked up and saw what he described as a strange, pulsating object in the sky. He pulled over and got out of his car to try and get a closer look at what he was seeing, and he thought that at first it was a large airplane coming in for a possible emergency landing. Jerry then wrote a note which he put on his car windshield that said, "Have gone to investigate possible plane crash. Please call law enforcement officers." He also scrawled the word "stop" on the side of his vehicle to try and get whoever was passing by to stop and read the note, thereby calling attention to it and alerting the authorities about it. He simply scrawled the word "stop" in shoe polish and then walked off to investigate the strange sight in the sky. A fish and game inspector came along and found the note sometime later, and after alerting the sheriff's office, a search party was launched both for Jerry and for the alleged plane crash he claimed to have gone to investigate. When he was brought to the hospital, no one could understand why he was completely out cold and unable to be woken up by any of the usual means, and there also seemed to be nothing physically wrong with him either. When he did finally wake up, he claimed that his jacket was missing, but that he otherwise felt perfectly normal, if not a little tired and confused. He was then transferred to William Beaumont Hospital at Fort Bliss, so that there he could be observed for 4 days, and after that he was put back on duty and into circulation. Not too long after continuing his duties, Jerry began suffering random fainting spells while on duty, and, fearing for his health, his superiors at the base made him go and get evaluated again at the hospital. He fainted again, and when he woke up at the hospital, he was said to have been in a similar state to when he had first been there a few weeks earlier. He woke up suddenly, panicked, and once again started asking the hospital staff if there had been any survivors. It seemed like he was having some sort of flashback, and when he woke up that time, he thought he had been waking up originally, meaning Jerry Irwin was completely unaware that any time had passed at all between when he left the note on his car and woke up. He didn't know he had been on duty for all those weeks, or that he had been fainting. He had no memory at all of the previous weeks, and in his mind, he had only just gone to investigate a possible plane crash. He was kept at the hospital for a full month for observation, and was then once again released back on base into active duty. The very next day, he suddenly left base without permission and got on a bus to El Paso, stopping at Cedar City and disembarking. He then headed directly to where he had originally parked his car on the side of the road, and to the same area where he had originally been investigating what he thought was a possible plane crash. He apparently found his jacket, and inside one of the pockets was a pencil shoved inside of a buttonhole with a piece of paper entwined around it. Jerry purportedly burned the paper, but then came out of whatever trance he was seemingly in and returned to the road. He was picked up there by the local sheriff. The sheriff told Jerry what had happened to him, but he had no recollection at all of leaving the base or as to why he had traveled back to that very spot. He also had no idea what was on the paper that he burned or why he had burned it in the first place. Jerry Irwin was subjected to another extensive psychological evaluation, but when no further answers could be found, a deeper analysis was ordered. He was once again put into Beaumont Hospital for tests and additional evaluation, but then he was almost immediately released again. As soon as he was released, he once again went AWOL without any warning, and he hasn't been seen or heard from since. So, what happened to Jerry Irwin? And why was he seemingly so obsessed with that particular location on the side of the road? Why had he gone back there? What happened to him initially that made it so he was so knocked out that even the usual methods of waking someone up from a stupor proved useless when used on him? How and why had he been so entranced that he had no memory of returning to that spot or why he had burned that piece of paper? If he was tranced or knocked out, or both, then by whom and why? There are so many questions here, but with no answers. It's impossible to understand mostly anything about this case and what happened to Jerry himself after he went missing again. Why was he continuously released from the hospital? And if it was really because nothing could be found to be wrong with him, then what was going on with him? One of the main questions is how did he end up at that hospital in the first place? But again, we'll probably never know, and there's been no new information about this case, though conspiracies and rumors run rampant around it still to this day. Jerry Irwin is still listed as a missing person. Next, Bonita Chamberlain. On February 13, 1978, a young mother-to-be named Bonita Chamberlain, who was only 24 years old, arrived at the Sacred Heart General Hospital in Eugene, Oregon, seemingly in labor and ready to give birth to her baby girl. Bonita had gone into labor 5 weeks early, and the premature infant was immediately put into intensive care, as she fought for her life for a week. Bonita dealt with it wonderfully, by all accounts, and when she went back to the hospital to visit her little girl, after having been released herself a few days earlier, she was told that her daughter was doing great and was becoming very strong and healthy. In fact, the baby girl was doing so well that the hospital surprised Bonita by telling her she would be able to take her daughter home that afternoon. Bonita was incredibly excited and relieved, and she immediately went and called a friend to tell them the good news. That was the last time anyone ever heard from her. When she didn't return home that night, she was reported as missing, and the authorities launched a search. Her car was quickly found, and it seemingly had been abandoned at a nearby bottling factory, and it didn't take long for them to find her purse, which had been discarded in the parking lot of the University of Oregon. The last time anyone saw her, she was driving out of the parking lot of the hospital after being given the good news about her daughter. Her newborn daughter and Bonita's 2 oldest daughters were all left behind with no answers and without their mother. Authorities thought they solved the mystery a week later when they made a gruesome discovery. They found the remains of a murdered woman stuffed into a plastic bag and then dumped into a garbage bin. However, it turned out to be someone different and had nothing to do with Bonita. So what happened to Bonita Chamberlain? It's still a mystery to this day, and she is still considered a missing person. Next, Tavish Sutton. An equally strange disappearance happened on March 6, 1993, when a 1-month-old baby named Tavish Sutton was admitted to the Hugh Spalding Pediatric Unit of Grady Memorial Hospital in Atlanta, Georgia. Tavish had been admitted in order to have an abscess removed, and after a routine minor surgery, he was sent into a semi-private room to recuperate and rest. Because his mother was being treated for psychiatric problems at a mental institution at the time, Tavish was released back into the custody of the Department of Child and Family Services, as he had been living with a foster family since he was released from the hospital after being born. His biological mother didn't even know her new baby was having surgery or that he had been admitted into the hospital that day. 3 days after that surgery, Tavish Sutton would vanish without a trace. In the early morning hours, around 6:45 a.m. on March 6, 1993, a nurse checked on him and found him to be doing well. She returned to the room 15 minutes later, and the baby was simply gone. A thorough search of the hospital and the surrounding area turned up nothing at all, and the nurse was the only one who had entered or left the unit at that time. Some sources say she's the only one that left the hospital at all that hour on that day. No suspects ever turned up, and because his mother hadn't even known he was there in the first place, and because she'd been under the care of staff at the institution she was in, with her whereabouts for that entire day being known and verified, she wasn't even considered a suspect, nor were any of her or Tavish's other family members. A lawsuit was filed against the hospital, and it resulted in a $600,000 settlement, but no leads were ever found as to what became of Tavish Sutton, who was only 1 month old at the time of his disappearance. The main theory in the beginning was that a woman who would show up at the hospital pretending to be pregnant all the time had somehow abducted him, but this was never proven, and that lady too had an alibi and wasn't able to be considered a suspect in this case. How did an almost newborn baby vanish from such a public place in the matter of a mere 15 minutes? Tavish Sutton has never been found, and there hasn't ever been a single lead or clue as to what happened to him. Well, friends, there you have it. Hospitals are places we go when we're injured to some extent, and we expect to leave them healed and complete. Yet for the people we've discussed here today, and so many others throughout the world, hospitals have been their final destination before passing into the strange world of bizarre and mysterious disappearances. Where did these people go, and what happened to them? How could a person so completely disappear so suddenly and leave behind absolutely no trace at all of what happened to them or where they ended up? Hospitals are very public places that are staffed by thousands of people in some cases, so how does something like this even begin to happen? Those are all great questions, but unfortunately they will most likely forever remain without answers, at least in the majority of these. I look forward to your comments on these cases, but please be friendly and respectful. Till we meet again, be good to yourselves and each other, and I'll see you just a little further on down the trail. I'm Steve Stockton, and I'll talk to you next time. And please, tell your animals I said hi.